Okay, so thank you for skipping the party last night again. Nate and I are here today to talk to you about the philosophy behind Backdrop CMS. So this just answers the question why we decided to fork Drupal. It's a crazy, harebrained idea, but we didn't do it lightly. We have another session at the end of the day today where we'll do a live demo of the software. So if you haven't seen it recently, there's a lot of fantastic new features we'd like to show off. So hopefully by the end of this session, you'll be so convinced the Backdrop is the best thing ever that you will tell all of your friends all day today that they have to see it in action, and then when we do the same session or the next session in this very room this afternoon, it'll be packed with people because we'll get everybody who didn't skip the party last night as well as our friends and family here today. Backdrop is a free open source CMS that will help you guys build websites for businesses, nonprofits, and education. So we have a very specific stated target market, which is something that we wanted to start off with at the very beginning when we first started working on Backdrop. Backdrop is a fork of Drupal. Does everybody here know what a fork is already? Yeah. So we basically took Drupal, stole it, changed its name, and released it as something else.
It's not really stealing, it's...
Well, it's open source. It's taking.
It's diversifying.
Sure.
How about that?
More options.
Yeah.
So in the world of Drupal, this is something that I know that I became guilty of very early on, is I would go into a meeting with a bunch of people, we'll talk to them about what their needs were, and I would say, oh yeah, we can do that in Drupal. And then the next meeting, I'd be like, we can do that in Drupal. And the next meeting, we can do that in Drupal. And Drupal became sort of the hammer, and every meeting I went in to talk about a technical problem, that became a nail. And that made sense back then because there weren't a lot of other tools out there. That was before we had WordPress, it was before we had Squarespace. And once you're over the Drupal learning curve, especially if you really love Drupal, you like working that way. So back then, so 10 years or so ago, every time a friend came to me and said they needed a website, I wanted to build them a Drupal website. Today, I would not recommend that approach. Even with Backdrop, do not give all your friends Backdrop websites. A lot of my friends come to me and they say, I need a website, and I'm like, hey, have you heard of Squarespace? There's this thing that you can use yourself to build your own site. Or if they need something with a little more functionality, you can say, oh, you can get a free site on WordPress.com, and if you need to host your own site, you can try, to take your own hosted WordPress version. And only when they start to need something a little bit more customized or a little bit more complicated do I talk to them more about whether something like Backdrop or Drupal will be a good fit for them. And we're hoping that Backdrop will just be another tool in the toolbox of today's web developer, where you can evaluate every project and see what might be the best solution, given your, who's working on it, your budget, your time constraints, who's going to host it, all of the normal things that you would take into consideration when evaluating a project.
So Jen and I together, we're the founders of Backdrop CMS. Jen does generally the project management side of things and handling the people side of things, and I handle largely the technical, the merging and the core committing and things of that nature. We've got a long history with Drupal between a large number of sites, some of the sites that we've built out. Do we have a slide for... Okay, and we've done a ton of training. I was originally one of the Lullabot trainers that did in-person trainings back when we were the only in-person training company that did Drupal, and we traveled around the world doing training. We wrote a book. Let's see, Jen was...
I was the director of training at Chapter 3 for a number of years. I wrote all of their training material, and that was the very beginning of the influx of training in the Drupal world. So the materials I wrote were given to Acquia and distributed to anyone who's an Acquia training partner. So if you've ever taken an Acquia training class, you might have been learning from documents that I started back in the beginning. And this just goes to say that Nate and I have a lot of experience showing Drupal to people who haven't seen it before or maybe need to know more about it. And we're starting to learn what the pain points are for new people adopting Drupal or for existing people trying to get it to do what they need it to do.
So we also have a pretty good history in Drupal core. I wrote the original Ajax framework. I'm still actually one of the maintainers for file and image modules in Drupal core for Drupal 7. And I wrote the dialogue system that's in Drupal 8 today, as well as the CK editor module as the primary proponent for putting it into Drupal 8.
I'm a little bit newer to core development. I didn't get involved until after Drupal 7 came out, and I felt that it was a less usable product than Drupal 6. So I got involved in the usability team. I started working on seeing the kinds of problems both cited and uncited people experienced with Drupal 7, created a bunch of issues to work on that. And then based mostly on my experience in training, I realized that the theme layer was too hard for new people to learn, and most people coming to Drupal were coming with an experience of HTML and CSS as sort of the lowest common denominator, and we need to make that better. So I accidentally became the unofficial Twig initiative lead for Drupal 8, and I did that for a couple of years, wrangling a bunch of core developers to get Twig as the new front end. So we have a lot of experience not only in building websites and seeing what they need, talking to people and seeing what they need, but also seeing how decisions are made and changes are made in the software itself. And then I think most importantly, Nate and I are huge advocates of the Drupal community. Long before I ever gave a talk or wrote a line of code for Drupal, I was here at Badcamp running a registration desk. And getting to talk to people at camps and conferences everywhere is, I think, the most exciting part for us. I mean, Drupal is the kind of thing we met at a Drupal camp. We're now married. It's the kind of thing that changes your life. If you're passionate about it and you believe in what it does, it's hugely powerful. And so I think that that's kind of where we're coming from in terms of working on Backdrop. Oh, we're still missing. So there's supposed to be a heart in here, but our font seems to not have loaded. Can we?
Well, anyway, it's supposed to say people who heart Drupal, not just people who Drupal, but that works.
People who Drupal.
That works too. So all of this is to say that all of this background about Jen and I is just to say that we are coming to this from a perspective of we really love Drupal, and Drupal, this is a thing that is made out of adversity, or I mean, it is driven out of some changes, but we are coming to this from the perspective of there's a massive audience of people that use Drupal, and we feel that Drupal 8, when it was in its development cycle, was heading in a different direction from that of its traditional audience or historical audience. And our objective with Backdrop CMS is to make it so that that audience can continue using Drupal, the Drupal that they know and love, for an indefinite period of time. So Backdrop is intended to be a continuation of serving the same audience that Drupal has served historically prior to angling for the high-end, ambitious digital experiences. So how are we going to run this thing? It was about a year and a half into the existence of Backdrop that we started forming some ideas about how we were going to run the project. And we adopted this model called the Project Management Committee model, or the PMC module, which is proven successful by the Apache community, and they actually enforce it for every single one of the Apache projects under the umbrella of the Apache namespace, not just the web server, but also Cordova, Cassandra, Lucene, OpenOffice. All of the projects that are under the Apache umbrella all have this model of leadership called the PMC. And the PMC is made up of a collection of people, essentially, that make decisions democratically. Anything that needs a decision, then we put it to a vote. And then we make up the PMC out of what should be a diverse collection of people that bring different perspectives to all of the decisions that need to be made.
So right now we have a bunch of the people. There's a lot of these faces you'll see here today, everyone except for Gregory, who's in Australia. It's a bit of a hard flight. And everybody is supposed to be representing a particular constituent of Backdrop users. So Nate is a core committer. Mike McCaffrey works mostly with contributed modules and APIs. Jack Aponte is working on selling Backdrop to our intended market, so that if we make any changes that would make Backdrop hard to sell, we've got to check on that. I'm particularly focused on the user experience, so anything I think will improve the product type feel of Backdrop as opposed to a framework, I'm going to be pushing. Wes Ruvalcaba, I'll get it eventually, is a front-ender. He did a training here a couple days ago. I'm not sure if any of you attended that. And he's there to make sure that we're not doing anything too crazy to the front end. And Gregory Nestis is a site builder. He's an architect who builds a ton of sites without writing any code. So we want to make sure he has all of the tools that he needs in order to do his job at the end of the day. So these people are all representing right now constituents of what they do with Backdrop, but we also want to make sure they represent other constituents like race, gender, geographic region, languages spoken. Anything we think we want to have represented in our community, we want to see represented in our management. So if we get a huge number of people who are adopting Backdrop in Ukraine or Latin America, we want to make sure there's spaces for them on the PMC to make sure that the needs of those communities are met as well. So we're going to try and make sure that the decisions driven for Backdrop aren't coming from a single person or from a single type of people, but are accurately representing the community as a whole.
So the project management committee's responsibilities include conflict resolution, setting the overall direction of the project, ensuring changes follow the project's philosophy, and if necessary can change the project philosophy to alter the overall direction of the entire project.
And that's really important because if we get to a point where we have a decision that needs to be made and everybody agrees, like, quickly, we need to do this thing to Backdrop, and we look at the philosophy and we go, well, it doesn't line up with the philosophy. If the project management committee agrees it needs to be done, then that means the philosophy needs to be modified. So what we would do is first change the philosophy so we have a public statement of what it is that Backdrop's trying to do that does line up with the change, and then we can make the change. So that way everybody in the community knows our intent before we start doing things that differ from that. So the PMC is supposed to take their own experience and their own perspective and try and look at any given issue and decide what is best for the project, not what is best for them. So it's a little bit different than how Drupal works, where everybody brings their own experience and their own desires and says, I want X. And nobody ever says, is this what's best for Drupal? Where in Backdrop, it's the other way around, where it doesn't matter what you want, you're supposed to say, do you think this is what's best for Backdrop? And so that should be based on your experience and representing your constituent as a whole. So again, you have to take what are the options available, look at the project philosophy, and say, do you think this lines up? And we're hoping that the different people and the different experiences will have different perspectives on that, so we'll be able to have a conversation. But again, it's about looking at the options proposed and saying, is this what's right for Backdrop?
Yeah, so this all comes to summarize this point that in order to guide the project, the philosophy of the project has to actually be defined. So the PMC is making decisions against the philosophy, so the philosophy has to be written down. And up until very recently, Drupal's philosophy was very, very nebulous. There was a mission statement page, but nobody ever looked at it, and there were some points written down, but worse than not having them at all, they were inaccurate. Like, nobody really took them seriously, and not once was any decision that I've ever seen put to the question, how does this align with our project philosophy in Drupal? Because that's not the way Drupal works. Drupal is everybody gets to bring their own idea of what they want, and then if they work hard enough and put enough time, then it can get in. The duocracy kind of model of development. But by defining the philosophy, it makes it so that we can make decisions that are cohesive, ones that are like, we're bringing our experiences together, but then we're saying, how can we do what's best for the project according to what we have outlined as our objective. So let's go over them. So what is the Backdrop set of philosophies? I'll let you go through these, Jen.
So the first one is easier updates, and this obviously came from the experience of people trying to get from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. I also personally experienced a lot of pain getting a lot of my clients from 6 to 7. It was a bumpy transition for a lot of them where it was pushing their budgets and they didn't necessarily see a benefit to doing it. That's the kind of thing we want to mitigate in Backdrop. We want to make it so that everybody can stay up to date without a huge burden on developers or site owners. The next one is simplicity. This is rather than following like the latest and greatest exciting design patterns, we want to write code that will apply to the majority of people. And this is not necessarily developers, but just people who are going to be opening this up for the first time. We want more people to be able to contribute. In order to do that, the code has to be easier to understand and simpler to follow. Focus is to make sure that the features that are in core are going to benefit the majority of people using it. So if we look at what's in core currently, we can say, okay, there's some stuff in here that benefits less than 1% of the community, and it's making it really hard for the rest of the community to write SQL queries or translate things or whatever it happens to be, and we'll pull it out. And so that should be a contrib module. That's something that doesn't belong in core. And then when we look at the list of things that are slated for core, we say, is this going to benefit most people, or is it only going to benefit that 1% of people? And if it doesn't benefit most people, then it's going to stay in contrib. It's not going to go in core. So it'll help us keep our focus really narrow on things that we think are most important to most people, and that we'll be able to iterate and improve faster with less code or more important code. Extensibility is also super important. Drupal is great, but it wouldn't be as powerful as it is today without the massive number of contributed modules and themes and other things that you can plug into it to get it to do what you want. Backdrop can't lose that, right? Like if it's going to be the same as Drupal, it's still got to have modules and themes and plugins and layouts and profiles and everything else that everyone wants from it. Performance. This also came from Drupal when it was Drupal 6. You could put it on shared hosting. You could get away with that. In Drupal 7, you started people reaching the limits of what their hosting providers could deliver for a Drupal site, and you saw the emergence of Drupal-specific hosting providers like Pantheon, Acquia, Platform, Black Mesh. All of these companies emerged specifically to meet this need. Nate was a performance engineer for Lullabot, and he used to hate the fact that job was even necessary. He's like, why do we write code that requires this specialized knowledge to make it go fast enough? So that's a personal issue for him. It's a personal issue for me because most of my clients were those that were on shared hosting. So we're going to try and make sure that Backdrop requires less resources, less memory. It performs faster without assuming a complicated infrastructure behind it. And releasing on time is also something that is super important. It's really hard for companies to figure out when they have to budget time for an upgrade if there's no date when that needs to happen. It's hard for developers to figure out when they need to set aside time to work on updating those projects, or if you're a core developer contributing to core, unless you know when that's going to happen. And so if we can have on-time releases that are planned and scheduled and everything continues to roll like clockwork, it's going to be much easier for the whole community to keep up with the project. And last one is freedom. Obviously, we're here because we were able to fork Drupal. Having open source software that is amazing and gives you the ability to take it and do what you want with it is super important to us. So we're going to retain that free open source mentality going forward.
Yeah, and this link down here at the bottom, if you go there, it goes into all of this in even more depth than what Jen has just covered. So if we take all of these principles and distill them together, then we arrive at the Backdrop mission statement, which is Backdrop CMS enables people to build highly customized websites affordably through collaboration and open source software. And although it's a little tedious to go through all of these words, they have meaning. People, our audience is not necessarily developers. We're not a framework. We're actually trying to be more product-centric. And so people, we're aiming for a broad audience of users that can potentially benefit from Backdrop. Highly customized, because we're not Squarespace and we're not WordPress. We're more customized than those products.
We have fantastic APIs, so you can customize by writing your own modules and themes, or you can customize by adding any number of contributed modules and themes. Just something that's really important to differentiate something like Backdrop from something like Squarespace.
Websites. That we are about websites. Like, we're not, web systems and APIs and decoupled front ends, all of these things are all options with Backdrop, very much so as they were with Drupal 7, but our focus is really on delivering a website. All of those things around it are peripheral. And so, and doing so affordably. And this is one of our key things about, like, how can we make it so that we are saving people time and money, because if your system isn't saving you those things, then you shouldn't be using the system in the first place. It's the entire purpose of any content management system is to save people time. And then collaboration and open source software, doing things more better together, and we do it with free software. So let's look at this affordable word and say, how can we make web development more affordable? We can increase the out-of-box functionality. If the software does what you need right out of the box, then you're shortening the time, the ramp-up time, and also just the general mentality of download Drupal, now download these same 15 modules on every single website. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So take those ones that are standardized and include them out of the box. Improve the user experience, make it so that people can use the software more easily with maybe less need for documentation. Any common WTFs, you should try to address those as quickly as possible. Improving the developer experience. This has some of our desire to maintain backwards compatibility as well, that things should be as straightforward as possible, using familiar patterns as much as possible, and also actually being consistent about it over time. So if you learn something, that knowledge should apply for as long as possible. This one's kind of obvious. Decrease server resources. That if your software is less expensive to host, that translates directly into cost. If you need fewer web servers to power the same website. Making maintenance faster and easier, whether that is like applying regular. Do we have updates? This is up wrong. Yeah, okay. Sorry, these next two are kind of the same thing. So making updates faster and easier or automatic. We're already working on pushing towards automatic updates. The current version of Backdrop that just came out last month has the ability to update core itself, so it can update itself, but that functionality is currently hidden while we're testing out further, and it's currently manual. You have to still click a button. But we're moving towards automatic updates, because making it so that when a security update comes out, like that is literally hundreds of thousands of hours every single time that happens, as far as the cost of getting that security out onto every single Drupal website that's out there. And if we can make it so that even a percentage of those people can just say, oh, my site was automatically updated, or I can just go check it and see, okay, the automatic update was fine. That's a lot of time being saved.
Even pushing a button, just giving someone who's maybe not great at maintaining their site the ability to push the button when a security update comes out, I think is going to be huge for making them safe. And more. I mean, obviously we're coming from Drupal. There's already a pain point around the cost of how much it takes to have a Drupal website over the long term. And with this being one of our primary objectives, is making Web 12 more affordable, every time we come out with a version of Backdrop, we're going to be like, okay, what is the current pain point? How can we resolve that? What's currently taking too long? What's currently frustrating? How can we make it easier for people to save more money in the future?
So releasing on time was one of our key points here. We have 3 releases a year. They come out like clockwork, January 15th, May 15th, and September 15th. And so far, it actually should be 12. 12 on-time releases, including 1.0. We're currently on version 1.11, so regular minor releases is the key thing, with no API breakage in between those versions.
Too. I didn't update this slide. Sorry, everyone.
Oh, oops.
Yeah.
So the next one's actually January 15th, 2018, and it'll be 1.12.
And if you're curious to see what's in it, we have a milestone in the GitHub issue queue that you can check out if you want.
Yeah. So rolling back to that idea of including more out-of-box functionality, we can take a look at. Oh, this is really too bad because the icons are missing.
Why did you update Font Awesome?
Sorry. Well, that's really unfortunate. So, okay,
so we can bring up the slide from the other presentation where it's working.
Well, okay. So, had our fonts worked, it would show you which ones were in core and which ones were not. But numbers-wise, we've got 30 of the top 72 modules in core, 30 of them that are in contrib that are completed, 4 of them that are underway, and 4 that are not started. And the ones that are not started are ones that usually cause people some consternation, but it includes ones like Views PHP that lets you put PHP code into your view configuration. And so there's a reason why it's not ported. But I don't even know why that's one of the top 72 Drupal modules. And let's see.
Let's see, we didn't have
field collection.
Field collection, but we do have paragraphs and multi-field. So we've got 2 alternate solutions to that, and we're working on upgrade path from field collection in Drupal 7 to paragraphs in Backdrop. And there's another one, media YouTube, we don't have. We do have YouTube module as an alternative, so there's an upgrade path from media YouTube to YouTube. There's just stuff like that where in most cases we have a comparable alternative, and that's why this one isn't there yet.
Let's see. Here we go. We do have this side. Modules that have been
Can you
bundled.
go back one more time? So one thing that would have been really cool if you could see the icons is you would have been able to see that on the left-hand side, most of them, so this goes most popular and then goes down this way. So most of the ones on the left-hand side were blue because they were in core. So you could see like the highest, most used modules are ones were in core. And then as you move down this way, it became more and more green because these are the ones that are in contrib. So you could sort of see our like, put more out of the box effort going into taking the things that are most important and making sure those are available to everybody without needing to download and install them.
So the ones that are included in core are listed here. Some of them with asterisks, it's not a direct port, but there's like a corollary that is available. Things like panels, we've got the layout system that is included ever since Backdrop 1.0. Media is not the full media, but we're pulling in parts one at a time. Superfish menus, we have something that's better than Superfish menus, I would say, called Smart Menus that is included out of the box. Yeah, but lots of modules that are literally direct ports from the Drupal 7 versions. Anything else? Okay.
These have been updated. So in Backdrop, if you go to our contrib group on GitHub, you can see that there's 501 projects in there. That's modules, themes, and layouts. If you go to the backdropcms.org website, you'll see there's only 400. And part of that is because we require that there be an official release for a module before it appears on the website. And that is also because you can install modules directly from within your Backdrop site. You don't need to go to backdropcms.org. And we wanted to make sure that anyone who's pushing a button to install a module is going to get something that's stable and not going to blow up their site. So these numbers are a little low compared to Drupal. Drupal has like 7,000 plus modules for Drupal 7. But in terms of the functionality that you're going to get from Backdrop, there's a lot there. And even better, there's 101 that are in the works. So there's 400 that are out now. There's 101 probably coming soon. Maybe not all of them are. Some of them might be abandoned or started and not finished. But there's a ton of activity going on. We get a couple of new releases every week. We have a weekly meeting where we talk about all of the new stuff that comes out. So we're seeing updates to existing projects and new projects coming along for Backdrop, which is really exciting.
Yeah, what about security? This question used to always come up, so we've incorporated it here. You know, when a security release of Drupal comes out,
Got a slide for that.
what happens? Well, we're on the Drupal security team, or at least I am. I'm kind of the ambassador for Backdrop within the Drupal security team. So every core security issue I have access to and work with the Drupal team to resolve the issue actually in Drupal itself, as well as porting that patch over to Backdrop. And if necessary, we have our own, well, not if necessary. We also have our own. We also have our own security team. Security@backdropcms.org is the email address, and we have backdropcms.org/security on a website where you can see all of the security announcements that we've posted, as well as report security issues that you may have discovered. And so far, we've had. It's not really something to brag about. But
We've had security releases.
We've had two releases that were Backdrop only security releases that were separate from those of Drupal, and we've had actually 2 Drupal security releases that didn't require Backdrop updates. So it's not always one-to-one, but it's usually pretty close considering the amount of code overlap between Drupal 7 and Backdrop is substantial. So our own system, yeah, we use a private security queue on GitHub, and then releases come out on Wednesdays, very similar to that of Drupal.
Coordinated with Drupals.
But in the world of contrib, so contrib is a little more fluid because we don't watch every security issue for every possible contrib module. When security announcements come out,
Jeff watches them.
For contrib modules, like on the day of announcements, then we say, oh, we need to also fix that module. And so they usually also come out the same day, but because they're reactive rather than proactive, like sometimes it's a day late as we get through things. But what we do, we work slightly differently from Drupal in that the Backdrop contrib group is a place where ownership is a little less specified than it is less rigid than it is in the Drupal community, where there's a single group on GitHub where all contrib projects live, and as part of the contrib agreement, you say that you will work with the security team Or, if necessary, the security team has the permission, essentially, to update your module on your behalf. And then push out a new release to address any security issues.
There are a couple of issues, especially with Drupal 7 lately. A lot more contrib projects are getting less and less attention, and so it's becoming unsupported. And there was one issue recently where there were 64,000 sites running a contrib module. It had a security release. They couldn't get in touch with the maintainer, and the project became unsupported. So now there's a security notice out there telling you your module's unsecure, but the module's unsupported and it's not going to get one, and now 64,000 sites are vulnerable without any path forward. And we wanted to prevent something like that from happening in Backdrop, because we don't want to rely on that one person to be able to make that change to that project to fix it out. So in Backdrop, you just say, you have the security team has commit access to all projects, and that way if we have that situation where there's a lot of people who are depending on a particular project and we can fix it, we're going to push out a fix and keep our community protected. We aren't going to do anything else in that repository. We're just going to fix the issue. But then at least that person has a chance to come back from vacation and fix it when they get back, or decide they don't like Joomla as much and return to Backdrop and continue working on it, or whatever their story is. We also have a pretty good process for handing projects over from one maintainer to another. So if someone was using it for 6 months and then they stopped and someone else starts using it, it's 2 weeks of inactivity and that can get transferred over. So we've had a ton of contrib projects get started and then handed off pretty quickly from one person to another. So it's been a lot more collaborative than I found in Drupal, just because setting up at the beginning, saying, you contribute it to a public group and you're responsible for it, but you don't necessarily have to own it in the same way you did in Drupal.
Keep going on this.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the Backdrop community. Here are a couple of numbers. These are updated recently. We have a little over 10,000 downloads of Backdrop. We have a little bit more than 1,600 members on backdropcms.org, so those are generally people who are showing some sort of interest. Live with Backdrop sites, just over 650. We have about 86 people who have contributed to Backdrop core. We have 77 people who are currently maintaining contrib projects. So what I think is really interesting about that is that we have more core contributors than we have contrib maintainers, which is the opposite of what you see in Drupal. And I think part of that is just because, number one, Backdrop is on GitHub, which is something that a lot of people are already familiar with. And number two, it's super easy to just find something wrong, create a pull request, and have it get in real fast, because there's not a lot of churn in our queue yet. And so people sometimes will be working on something, find a problem, and fix it as part of their daily work, not even realize they've accidentally become a core contributor. And then later on they'll be like, oh, I guess I'm going to write a module, and then they become a module maintainer later on. So we've had a bunch of people who were like, this person's amazing, and then a month later an application appears to join the contrib group, and we're like, you weren't part of contrib, you've been a core developer for a while, which is great. We also have 44 organizations on backdropcms.org that have listed themselves as seeking Backdrop projects. So the thing that's most exciting to me about that is not that there's very many of them, because there aren't, but that a lot of them are big Drupal shops, and they've looked at Backdrop and said, our team already has the skill in order to take on Backdrop work. So they're listing themselves as seeking those projects, which is pretty exciting. All right, if you would like to find some members of the Backdrop community, obviously we have our GitHub group where we do most of our code and issues, which is backdrop/backdrop. We have a Gitter live chat channel, so if you ever have any questions, whether they are theoretical or actual about a site you're working on, you're welcome to drop in there. All you need is a GitHub account and it'll automatically open in a browser. We have a forum, so if you do not have a GitHub account and still want to ask questions, there's a safe place for you to do that. And we have a bunch of members of our community who love answering questions in the forum, so they watch all the time and they try and be as helpful and friendly as possible, which is great. We have our website, backdropcms.org, which is full of documentation, resources. There's things like, you can find books on Backdrop listed there, that sort of thing. We have our Twitter account at Backdrop CMS, where we post sometimes useful, sometimes not so useful information, but it could be fun to follow. And we have meetings once a week, every Thursday at 1 p.m. We have a check-in to talk about what we're working on for the next version of Backdrop. We also have some other meetings that happen right before that one. We have a design-focused meeting, so if you're particularly interested in designer usability, we have a focus on those issues. And then the following week, we have a meeting on community outreach, trying to figure out how we're going to spread the word about Backdrop. At the end of every meeting, there's an open Q&A. So if you don't care about what we're working on in core, design, usability or outreach, you just have a question, you're also welcome to join in and say, hey guys, my dog won't eat his dinner, and we can talk about things we've done to get our dogs to eat their dinner, or whatever the question is you may have, preferably focused on Backdrop, but if your dog's named Backdrop, maybe that counts. So that's that. Also, exciting new things going on in Backdrop. Obviously, you guys are here. This is a Drupal event, so you can find Backdrop at Drupal camps. Bad Camp in particular has sort of been the place where we've been most active as our own sort of thing. We usually have a summit and a training in addition to sessions like this one. But we are also giving talks and presentations at other various open source nonprofit tech conferences around the country, and hopefully in Mexico next year, but we will see how that goes. And we are also going to start having some sort of casual get-togethers where people can chat about Backdrop. The first one is scheduled for January 15th, which is Backdrop's birthday. It also happens to be Drupal's birthday. So we are going to celebrate both Backdrop and Drupal's birthday on January 15th. Location TBD, but check the website. And there are going to be a bunch of parties at the same time in various places around the world. We're going to have one in Las Vegas and one in Twin Cities and one here in the Bay Area. So if you just want to get together, and there will probably be live demos of stuff going on in Backdrop and people, having birthday cake or gluten-free vegan birthday cake. I don't know, whatever it is people seem to want to do. And even more exciting, we have had enough enthusiasm of recent times to start setting up our own local meetups. So initially we were a little hesitant to do that because we were like, I'm not sure there's enough people in any given place to have a meetup on Backdrop yet, but we've gotten some clamoring from people about like, no, we need to set this up. In Las Vegas, they are starting to do Drupal Backdrop meetups. I think Luke had also mentioned doing Drupal Backdrop meetups here in the Bay Area.
That's true.
So there's a bunch of people who are going to be meeting together with both the communities, which I think is good. And then there may also be some Backdrop specific meetups coming. So also check the website for information about where those might be happening soon.
Yeah, so unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, we have a separate session that is all of the hands-on, like actually see Backdrop in action. And there's a lot to see. Like Backdrop looks different than Drupal, it acts different than Drupal in some ways. It's very similar in kind of all the ways that matter, though. So come to this same room here at 2:30 today, and we're going to be spending the whole session going through a hands-on presentation of using Backdrop and putting it into action. If you're really in a hurry, though, you can go to backdropcms.org and click the Try Demo button, and it'll spin up a Pantheon instance.
Actually, it now says install on Pantheon.
Oh, install on Pantheon. Sorry, the button right at the very top of the page.
Next to the download button.
And you can try out Backdrop in the meantime. Anything else?
Questions? Yes.
So security, of course, is important, and I kind of like the idea of giving the security team access to the contrib module repos. But how does that follow from your principles, or do you need a new principle to explain security? And remember to repeat the question for the
Yeah, so the question is, how does our security policy of updating contrib modules fall in line with our philosophy, or is it possible that we needed a point to cover security specifically? Do you have something to say?
No.
Okay. So let's see. I'm
just going to pull up the points.
Okay, thank you, because then I'll be able to say which one it fits best underneath. But actually, security is interesting that I've actually thought about that as being another point that possibly may need to be included, as well as internationalization. But I don't know. Now we're starting to talk about features, kind of. I don't know. Rather
Reasonably featured. Internationalization might be. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing for me is easier updates. That was something that I ran into as the person who's responsible for maintaining my client sites. And when I ran into that issue on Drupal.org where the module was just marked as unsupported, and then I went to the issue queue and was like, I'd be willing to take over the maintenance of the module just for the 18 sites that I have to maintain that are running it. And I saw that there was another person in the other queue who had also offered to maintain the module. And Drupal security staff was like, no, it's fine. They are going to use a different module in Drupal anyway. And I was like, whoa, that doesn't help me today. I want, there needs to be some process that's going to make it easier for people to maintain sites going forward. Like even if there's a security issue, there either needs to be an upgrade path to something, because a lot of time people, invest all their money in building their website, and they might have a little bit of budget for maintenance, but they're not planning on like migrating from one contrib solution to another at some random point in time when a security issue may or may not come out. So for me, it was really under the making it easier to update your site going forward, making sure there's always a path forward for everyone. And we've also started to include that in all of the contrib projects we've put into core. We've made sure there's an upgrade path from the contrib solution to the core path, which is different. In Drupal 7, CCK went in, but the upgrade path remained in contrib. We sort of flipped that around and said, no, it's core's burden to make sure there's an upgrade path there. So same thing for a lot of contrib modules, like we have a new reference solution. We're trying to make sure there's going to be an upgrade path from entity reference and from node reference. So
path auto or redirect.
Right, those as well.
Yeah.
So just making sure that, going from one project to another, there's always a path forward for the people who have to maintain it. The same thing for security, relevant there too.
Yeah.
Also, we don't have any principles about community. These are mostly about code and product. It might be good to think about adding one specifically focused on community too, because the way our community focuses feels a little bit different than how it did in Drupal, just because it tends to be more welcoming to a beginner level developer, and having a security team that has ability to go in and fix stuff is also helpful there, because if you have someone who's like, oh, I'm not sure I can maintain a project, knowing that there's help, like you're going to have a security issue, we're going to help you, we can update the project for you, we can tell you what needs to be changed, I think is the kind of thing that's going to make that environment easier for more people who maybe wouldn't normally want to step up and maintain a project for. So. And that's also talking to our sort of down market shift of audience as well, where if we're going to be going for smaller scale sites, they're probably going to have newer developers or less expert in this particular field's developers, and we're hoping to do that all together. Are there any other questions? All right, well, there are a bunch of people that just walked in. I don't know if you're here early for your next session.
We're early.
Yeah, okay.
It's nice to see you.
We're here to greet you.
Okay,
I
thank
don't
you
know
guys.
what time it is.
Thank you guys, everybody. I think. Yeah,
Is it time? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right.